The Great Hall of the Celestial Union was built to make people feel small. Its ceiling rose like a night sky made of crystal, filled with slow-moving lights that represented the stars of 1,000 worlds. Tall pillars carved with ancient symbols stood in perfect lines. At the center was a wide circular platform, glowing softly. This was where futures were decided. Princess Elira of the Luminari stood alone on that platform. She kept her back straight, just as she had been taught since childhood. Her hands were folded calmly in front of her, though her fingers trembled slightly. Her pale blue skin shimmered faintly under the lights, and the thin light filaments in her silver hair glowed with quiet emotion she tried hard to control. Today was the selection ceremony. For generations, this ceremony had decided political bonds between noble houses and powerful species. It was not about love. It was about strength, survival, and alliances. To be chosen meant honor. To remain unchosen meant shame. Elira had known, even before she entered the hall, that this day would be difficult. The Luminari were known for wisdom, empathy, and deep energy control. But in recent cycles, the galaxy had changed. Wars were common. Borders burned. The Union valued physical power, intimidation, and fear. The Luminari were called soft behind closed doors, and Elira, the youngest princess, was considered the softest of all. One by one, representatives stepped forward. A towering Dravok warlord looked at her, his red eyes scanning her slim form. He spoke bluntly, without cruelty but without kindness either. "She is unsuitable. I decline." A tall insectoid noble followed, clicking softly as he considered her. After a moment, he turned away. "No combat value, declined." Murmurs spread through the hall like a quiet storm. Another suitor, another rejection. Each time Elira bowed politely, her expression calm. Inside, something heavy pressed against her chest. She reminded herself to breathe, to endure. A princess did not beg, a princess did not break. From the high council seats, elders watched with unreadable faces. They had known this might happen. Some had hoped otherwise. At the far edge of the hall, nearly forgotten among the decorations and observers, stood a small group of humans. Humans were new to the Union, recently discovered, recently admitted. They were invited mostly as curiosities, primitive by galactic standards, using chemical propulsion and kinetic weapons instead of energy lances. But they were stubborn, adaptable, and strangely brave. Captain Daniel Cross stood among them. He wore a simple dark uniform, clean but unadorned. No glowing symbols, no displays of rank meant to impress aliens. He stood straight, hands behind his back, eyes forward. He was not supposed to be important today. Daniel had been sent as a military liaison, an observer only. Humans were not part of the selection system. Their species did not practice bonded political marriages. They were considered too individualistic, too emotional. As rejection after rejection echoed through the hall, Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He was not watching for entertainment like some others. He was watching her. He saw the way her shoulders stiffened slightly after each refusal. He noticed how she never let her expression fall, even when whispers grew louder. He saw dignity, not weakness. Around him, an alien noble laughed quietly. "So this is a Luminari princess," the noble muttered. "Unselected, how fitting." Daniel did not laugh. On the platform, the final suitor stepped forward, a tall crystalline being whose species valued dominance displays. He did not even speak. He simply shook his head and walked away. A deep tone echoed through the hall, the final bell. Silence followed, heavy and uncomfortable. The master of ceremony rose slowly. His voice carried across the hall. "Princess Elira of the Luminari remains unselected." The words hit harder than any insult. Unselected. That single word carried consequences. Political weakness, loss of standing, pity that could turn into danger. In some species, unselected nobles were quietly removed from influence. Sometimes worse. Elira felt the weight of thousands of eyes on her. She bowed deeply, as tradition demanded. Her vision blurred for just a moment, but she forced it clear. She turned slightly, preparing to leave the platform. That was when she felt it, a gaze that did not burn with judgment. She looked toward the edge of the hall, and she saw him, the human. He stood apart from the others, not whispering, not smiling. His face was calm, serious. There was no hunger in his eyes, no amusement, no pity, only attention. Something inside Elira shifted. Her people believed in resonance, the idea that emotions could align like waves. For the first time that day, the crushing pressure in her chest eased slightly. She stopped walking. The master of ceremony frowned. "Princess?" Elira turned fully. Her heart pounded. This was forbidden. Tradition was clear. Unselected meant the ceremony ended. Speaking now would break protocol. But if she stayed silent, her future was already written. She lifted her chin. Her voice when she spoke was clear. "I choose," she said. Gasps filled the hall. The master of ceremony stiffened. "That is not permitted. You were not selected." "I understand," Elira replied, "but my people's laws allow choice if both parties consent." Whispers exploded into loud murmurs. The master hesitated. "And whom do you choose?" Elira's glowing eyes moved again, settling on Daniel. The hall followed her gaze. Confusion spread, then disbelief. The human, Daniel felt every eye snap toward him. His heart skipped. Elira took a breath, then spoke words no one expected. "Will you be my husband?" The hall erupted. Some laughed openly. Others shouted in protest. Several council members stood at once. The idea was absurd to them. A human, a species barely accepted, politically insignificant. Daniel's mind raced. This was insane. He was not prepared for this. He was not trained for political marriages, alien customs, or royal bonds. Accepting could pull humanity into dangerous politics. Refusing could destroy her. He looked at her again. She was not smiling. She was not desperate, she was choosing. Daniel stepped forward. The human delegation froze. "Captain," one whispered urgently. "Don't." Daniel raised a hand slightly, silencing them. He walked onto the platform. Each step echoed. When he stopped before Elira, the difference between them was clear. She was taller, glowing softly. He was solid, grounded, human. He met her eyes. "What happens if I say no?" he asked quietly. Her voice was just as quiet. "I will be remembered as the princess no one wanted." Daniel exhaled slowly. He thought of Earth, of how humans were always underestimated, of how often strength was mistaken for loudness and cruelty. He thought of the quiet courage it took to stand alone in front of a galaxy and still speak. He straightened. "I don't know your customs," he said, his voice carrying. "I don't know your politics, but I do know this: no one deserves to be discarded like they don't matter." The laughter began to fade. Daniel turned to the council. "I accept," he said simply. Silence fell. The master of ceremony stared at him. "You understand this bond is permanent under Union law?" "Yes." "You understand it binds your species politically?" "Yes." He turned back to Elira. "And you," the master said, strained, "confirm this choice." Elira nodded, light pulsing warmly along her skin. "I do." The ancient symbols on the platform flared to life. The bond was sealed. Somewhere deep within the Union systems, records updated. Laws shifted. Consequences began to form. Daniel felt a strange warmth spread through his chest, not magical but emotional. He had made a choice he could never take back. Elira lowered her head slightly, a gesture of deep respect. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel replied just as quietly, "You're not alone anymore." As they stood together, surrounded by shock and outrage, no one noticed the subtle change in the air. The unselected princess was unselected no longer. And the galaxy had just underestimated humanity for the first time of many. The days after the ceremony were colder than space itself. News spread across the Celestial Union faster than any ship could travel. Hollow screens replayed the moment again and again, the unselected princess turning, the human stepping forward, the bond sealing in light. Some channels mocked it, others argued. A few warned that this single decision could fracture alliances built over centuries. Princess Aelira and Captain Daniel Cross were moved to a guarded wing of the Luminari embassy, far from the grand halls. The walls there were smooth and pale, glowing softly to calm emotions. It did little to calm the storm outside. Daniel stood near a wide window, looking out at the endless curve of the city world below. Flying structures drifted like metal clouds. Traffic lanes glowed in slow patterns. Everything looked peaceful, but he knew it was not. Behind him, Aelira sat quietly on a low seat, her hands resting in her lap. The glow in her skin was dimmer now, reflecting exhaustion more than fear. Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I didn't plan for any of this," he said honestly. Aelira looked up at him. "Neither did I," he turned to face her. "I need you to know something. I didn't accept out of duty alone. I meant what I said." Her eyes softened. "That matters more than you realize." Outside the room, guards stood watch, Luminari and Union security mixed together. Even that was unusual. Normally, species stayed separate. Already, lines were blurring. The first challenge came sooner than expected. A Union Council summons arrived before the local cycle ended. The message was polite but firm. Daniel and Aelira were required to appear and explain their bond. The council chamber was smaller than the ceremonial hall but far more dangerous. This was where decisions turned into actions. Daniel walked beside Aelira as they entered. He noticed how the whispers followed them, sharper than before. Some council members looked angry, others curious. A few studied Daniel like a puzzle they did not like. The High Arbiter spoke first. "This bond violates tradition." Aelira answered calmly. "It follows Union law." "Barely," another counselor snapped, "and it weakens the selection system." Daniel stepped forward slightly. "Or it strengthens it by allowing choice." Several heads turned sharply. The Arbiter's eyes narrowed. Humans were not invited to speak. Daniel did not raise his voice. "Then perhaps the system is flawed." A low hum filled the chamber, an expression of displeasure from several species. Aelira placed a hand lightly on Daniel's arm, grounding him. Then she spoke. "My people have always valued harmony," she said. "But harmony does not mean silence. It means balance. I chose a partner who sees me as more than political value." A Dravok counselor leaned forward. "You chose weakness." Daniel met the alien's gaze. "You confuse quiet with weakness." The Dravok's eyes flared. "Your species has no record of dominance." Daniel nodded. "True, we survived anyway." That answer unsettled the room. The council did not dissolve the bond, but they imposed conditions. Daniel would be tested, not formally announced, not written in law, but understood. He would be watched, provoked, and placed in situations meant to expose failure. If he failed badly enough, the bond could be declared unstable and undone. Aelira knew this the moment they left the chamber. "They will try to break you," she said quietly as they walked back. Daniel gave a small smile. "They've been trying to break humans for a long time." The first test came disguised as an invitation. Daniel was asked to attend a strategic defense meeting, something no human had ever been invited to before. The room was filled with military leaders from dominant species. Holographic battle maps floated in the air, showing contested border systems. The atmosphere was tense. An enemy power, the Car Dominion, had begun probing Union space. Their fleets were massive, heavily armed, and known for overwhelming force. The alien commanders spoke in confident tones, discussing firepower, shield strength, and intimidation displays. Daniel listened. He noticed gaps. When it was his turn to speak, the room grew quiet, not respectful quiet, but expectant, waiting for him to fail quiet. "The Car don't fear your fleets," Daniel said simply. A commander scoffed. "We outgunned them 3-1. "Yes," Daniel agreed, "but you move slowly." Your supply lines are exposed, and you fight where they expect you. He reached out and adjusted the map. If you hit their logistics instead of their fleets, he continued, they'll retreat without a major battle. The commanders stared. That is cowardly, one said. Daniel shook his head. It's efficient. The plan was controversial, but desperation made the council approve a limited test. The results shocked everyone. A small joint force struck supply hubs exactly as Daniel predicted. The car fleet stalled, then withdrew to protect their own systems. No major battle, minimal losses. For the first time, human strategy was discussed seriously in Union channels. Elira watched the reports with quiet pride. At court, things were harder. Some nobles refused to acknowledge Daniel as her husband. They addressed him as the human or ignored him completely. Servants were instructed to delay, to inconvenience, to test patience. Daniel noticed everything. He said nothing. Instead, he learned names. Thanked workers personally, asked questions, helped where he could. Over time, whispers changed tone. He listens. He remembers. He doesn't threaten. Respect grew quietly like roots under stone. Elira changed too. Standing beside Daniel, she spoke more often in council discussions. Her ideas, once dismissed, were now considered, partly because Daniel supported them, partly because success made people listen. One evening, as they walked through a garden lit by floating lights, Elira stopped. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. Daniel considered the question carefully. "No," he said, "but I understand the cost now." She nodded. "So do I." She looked at him, truly looked at him, not as a symbol, not as a political shield, but as a person. "I chose you because you saw me," she said, "not because you were strong." Daniel smiled faintly. And now," she replied, "I see how strong you are in ways they fear." Far away, beyond Union borders, car commanders reviewed reports with growing concern. The humans had entered the game, and they did not play like anyone else. The pressure that had been building across the Celestial Union finally reached its breaking point. The car dominion did not retreat forever. They learned. They adapted. And when they returned, they did not come quietly. Warning signals spread across Union space like ripples in dark water. Border stations went silent. Trade routes shut down. Refugee ships crowded safe systems, carrying stories of massive fleets moving with purpose. In the Union Council chamber, fear replaced arrogance. Holograms showed car war formations advancing in layered waves. Their ships were larger than before, reinforced and clearly prepared for resistance. This was no probing attack. This was a message. Surrender strength, or be crushed. Council members argued loudly. Some demanded immediate concessions. Others called for full military response. Old rivalries between species surfaced again, making unity difficult. Princess Elira stood at the center of it all, listening. Daniel stood slightly behind her as protocol demanded, but his eyes were on the data streams. He saw patterns others missed, not in ship size, but in movement timing, in hesitation, in the way the car avoided certain regions of space. The High Arbiter finally spoke. "The Dominion demands the dissolution of the Luminari-human bond." The room went still. "They claim the bond destabilizes Union tradition," the Arbiter continued. "They say it proves weakness. They offer withdrawal in exchange for Princess Elira being removed from political influence and the human return to his species." Several counselors nodded slowly. The idea was tempting. Sacrifice 2 individuals, save billions. Elira felt the familiar weight press against her chest again. Not fear, recognition. This was the moment she had always known would come. She stepped forward. "No," she said. The word was calm, clear. Murmurs rose. The Arbiter frowned. "Princess." "I will not be surrendered," Elira continued. "And my husband will not be discarded to please those who threaten us." A Dravok counselor slammed a clawed hand on the surface. "You endanger the Union." Daniel stepped forward then, breaking protocol. What endangers the Union, he said evenly, is teaching our enemies that fear works. Several counselors turned on him at once. You are human, one snapped. You do not understand the cost of war. Daniel met the counselor's gaze. Humans understand it very well. That is why we choose carefully when to stand. The arbiter raised a hand for silence. Then tell us, human, how do you propose we face a force that outnumbers and outguns us? Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he activated a secondary projection. New data appeared. Routes, supply estimates, energy consumption curves. The car fleets are strong, Daniel said, but they are far from home. Their empire depends on constant forward pressure. They cannot afford long wars. He highlighted several systems. These regions are rich in resources but lightly defended. They assume no one would strike so deep. A murmur of interest spread. You propose invasion, a counselor asked. No, Daniel replied. I propose pressure. He explained in simple terms. Coordinated strikes not to conquer but to disrupt. Human-led task groups working with Union forces, using speed and unpredictability instead of raw power. Diplomacy channels kept open. A message sent without words. We are not afraid, and we are not careless. The council argued for hours. In the end, the decision passed by a narrow margin. The plan would be attempted. If it failed, the bond would be blamed. As fleets prepared, Daniel and Elira spent their last quiet hours together in the garden. Floating lights drifted around them, responding softly to their presence. If this goes wrong, Elira said, they will never forgive us. Daniel nodded. I know, she looked at him. Do you wish you had said no? He thought of the day in the hall. Of her voice when she chose him. No, he said again. I wish more people chose each other before choosing fear. She reached out and placed her hand in his, not as a symbol, as a promise. The operation began without ceremony. Human ships moved first, not the largest, not the most powerful, but the fastest. They slipped through gaps in car detection nets, guided by analysis rather than brute force. Union fleets followed, striking targets that mattered, fuel depots, repair docks, communication relays. Always withdrawing before major engagement, always leaving uncertainty behind. The car responded with anger. They chased shadows. They spread their forces thin. Their advance slowed. Across Union space, something changed. Species that had once doubted humans began requesting human advisors, not because humans were stronger, but because they were effective. On the diplomatic channels, Daniel spoke rarely. When he did, he spoke plainly. We do not want your territory, he told car envoys. We want stability. The car did not understand this at first. Their culture respected only dominance, but pressure spoke louder than words. Weeks passed. Losses mounted, not catastrophic but constant. The cost-benefit calculations shifted. Finally, the car requested formal negotiation. The council chamber filled again, this time with tension rather than fear. Car representatives appeared, tall, armored, their expressions hard. They looked at Elira. They looked at Daniel. You changed the balance, the car leader said. Daniel nodded. We adapted. You broke tradition, the leader said to Elira. She met his gaze steadily. I broke silence. The negotiations were long. In the end, borders were recognized. Trade resumed. Hostilities ceased. No surrender. No sacrifice. The demand to dissolve the bond was quietly withdrawn. When the agreement was signed, the chamber was silent, not with shock but with realization. The Union had not fallen apart. It had grown. In the cycles that followed, the story spread across the galaxy. Not just of a war averted, but of a moment in a ceremonial hall where a princess had chosen someone no one expected. Elira's standing rose, not because of her husband alone, but because she had proven that compassion and courage could reshape power. Daniel became something new in Union records, not just a human, a bridge. One evening, long after the crisis had passed, they returned to the same platform where it had all begun. The hall was quiet now. Elira looked around, remembering the weight she once carried. "I was afraid that day," she admitted. Daniel smiled gently. "You still spoke." She turned to him. "You could have walked away." "I could have," he agreed. "But then I would have missed everything that followed." They stood together, not as symbols, not as exceptions, but as partners. Far beyond the Union, other species watched humans with new eyes. Not as weak, not as saviors, but as something far more dangerous to old thinking. Humans chose each other, and when they did, the galaxy changed.